Hey everyone, I'm Kapuscinski. I'm a senior .NET architect with TA Digital. I am a 4-time Sitecore MVP, and I like to talk. And I made the mistake of having a full-strength coffee when I was waiting for this a few minutes ago. And so, yeah, it's gonna be a fun ride, guys. So we're gonna talk a little bit about what happened and transpired at this year's Sitecore Symposium. We have a nice, wonderful photo taken out of the room of the whole complex. Also, the what I thought of as the death march there between the two between the two hotels, and where if you wanted to take in technical sessions and non-technical sessions, you walked through that a lot. Hopefully not when it was raining. Come on. All right, yeah, that's not perfect.
What? Oh, hold on. And now try.
Sweet. Okay, so here is our venue. It was the Swan and Dolphin Resort in Orlando. It was attached to Epcot Center and MGM Studios, which didn't really matter because you didn't really go see any of that anyway. You spent conference attendees spent most of their time down here and over here in the sessions, but it was a pretty good venue. I actually think I liked some of the other ones better, just because these were beautiful hotels when they made them back in the 90s, but I feel like they're time for a refresh. Yeah, so it was great. It was a good venue, and I think the reason why it's moved was that Symposium keeps outgrowing its the venue that it's been in. That originally it was at one casino in Vegas, then it got so big they had to move it to something bigger in New Orleans, and then it outgrew that, and then they were back to Las Vegas, and then they outgrew that. So this year we were in Orlando, and if you get to be too big for Orlando, I don't know what they're going to do. They're just going to take over an entire city, like Salesforce does, I guess. So like I said, Symposium continues growing. This year it required 2 separate but connected hotels. It involved a lot of walking, but there were a lot of sessions and a number of parallel tracks, which was really, really awesome. I will let Dean speak about this slide.
Yeah, so this is I borrowed this from Sitecore's wrap-up afterwards, just to give you an idea of who was there and why they were there. There were almost 3,000 attendees from 42 different countries. So a lot of folks from the US, as you would expect, because it was held here, but from all over the place. Asia Pacific, about 15% from Europe, a lot of folks from South America. There were 5 tracks, so there were lots of sessions going on simultaneously for new users, for marketers, for developers. It was pretty amazing. The attendees, you can look at the job level thing. There were a lot of people there who were like actual hands-on users of Sitecore, individual contributors, either developers or content people, but also a lot of representation at the upper ranks too. Lots of C-level folks, directors, senior directors, that sort of thing. It's funny, every one of these symposiums, they introduce a new sponsor level. So this year's was Diamond. They're going to run out of metals soon with like titanium and platinum. I don't know what you would have to pay to be like the cadmium sponsor or something. But anyway, in roles and organization, you can see that 20%, of course, developers, well represented here. Marketers, like the next biggest group, and then lots of people from like IT management, front end, content managers, all that good stuff. This was the first year the number of customers exceeded the number of partners. So that is actually a big milestone. So almost everybody there, or like more than 50%, were people who like use it to run their business, are not doing it on behalf of other people. So that was pretty cool. And from company size, like another interesting thing is that Sitecore is continuing its march toward larger scale implementations. So if you had seen like previous slides, every time they do this, the numbers kind of creep up toward those larger enterprises as the platform becomes more and more capable, it takes on more and more features.
I think that's also interesting too, in that that encompasses partners as well. And I think it really shows that there's a growing Sitecore development community, a growing Sitecore development ecosystem, and that the partners who do it are getting bigger.
Yeah.
You know, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of that growth was because partners who last year might have started in, might have been 400 people, and now they're 800 people,
Yeah.
right? And that moves them up that next category.
Yeah. Cool. On to the next thing.
So one of the cool things that Sitecore did this year, and which I'm going to abandon my cynicism for a few moments, is that they partnered with Sick Kids. It's a children's hospital in Canada that does really phenomenal work. They not only partnered with Sick Kids as a giving back program, where they donated a bunch of money through the course of the event and gave people an opportunity to help contribute to that. But they also used it as a wonderful case study of how to leverage the product to do good in the world, which I think is something that was really refreshing to see. You know, especially after last year's Lawnmower Men. I couldn't. So there was a really full agenda with multiple sessions per track. This is, I think, a lot of the growth that I was talking about in Symposium, that each year these tracks get bigger and bigger and bigger. And I remember a few years ago, it was like, oh man, this sucks. There was a couple of sessions when there were two presentations at the same time that I wanted to see. And anymore, it's just become, that's the rule instead of the exception.
This is one time slot here.
Yeah.
This is one time slot, like 45 minutes, and there's like literally 11 different sessions going on at the same time. So one of the things that, I think we've got some slides at the end where we like post some links. Like, you kind of need to like go research on the web. If you really want to know everything that happened, chances, like, no one person or no one company could see it all.
Yeah, it was really impressive and really, really, really great. And if you have the opportunity to go again next year, I definitely recommend trying to do so, because no matter what you're interested in, you're going to learn something, and probably a whole lot. So, like I was saying, there were a bunch of different conference tracks. There was development and IT, marketing strategy, innovation and best practices, e-commerce, and getting started. I have a warm spot in my heart for getting started because that's where my presentation was. But these tracks have changed from last year, and it really emphasized Sitecore's growth and acknowledgement of the sophistication of its audience. Right? It used to be that there was the technology track, but now it's development and IT. And the reason that IT is brought into that is because there are a lot of DevOps concerns now that that people who you would typically think of as IT people, as opposed to development people, can still learn things from that. That was there was just a whole lot of stuff to learn.
This is Ed's Model Railroad, by the way.
Was Ed's Model Railroad. It came down last weekend.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Ask him about that after the session.
Wait a minute, that's not real.
He has a flight ticket, right?
Yeah. No, that is not real.
Oh, really?
Yeah. No, those locomotives are about an inch tall.
What's the background on that, Ed?
That is a photograph that I took from the actual place where this is modeled after. That I took a panorama and then printed it out.
Sweet.
And that's the real thing that tricks everyone, because they're like, the background looks so real. I'm
Yeah.
like, because it is. The rest of it just. But you can see the seam right there if you notice, because I was too cheap to print it out on roll paper. And it was only ever supposed to be a temporary thing, but a bunch of sheets joined together.
It sells it. It really does.
Yeah.
It does. Nicely done.
So the key takeaways from Symposium, and this is where we're going to spend, I think, the most of our most time talking about, that Sitecore bought a company called Style Labs, and it beefs up Sitecore's end-to-end content management capabilities. Dean has a lot he's going to talk about with that. As something we've all known because we've all been here before, and we got a chance to see it, but Sitecore Commerce is really good now. It was not always the case, but it's actually a really great platform now, and has done and is capable of great things. Machine learning can now be leveraged for content management and marketing. Before people would use it just for insights, but now you can do a whole lot of really cool stuff with it. Sitecore customers are still struggling to use the full product. I think that's something that is going to be a continual, a continuous trend, because there is a lot of depth to it. And people, lots of people just use it for content management only. And if that's the case, that's great. It's it's the best content management system in the world. But there's still a lot of value to be unlocked. And I think it's good news for those of us who work for partners, because that means there's still a lot of work for us to do. And it's good news for those of you who work for customers, because it means that you still have a lot more you can do with it, or you can most likely do with it. One of the other takeaways is that headless stuff is super trendy right now. I have a love-hate relationship with headless websites. You guys know what I'm talking about when I talk about headless stuff? I don't have to explain it? Okay, cool. So, good, because that would take forever. But, from my perspective, that lots of people are chasing the trend of headless, including Sitecore. But I think Sitecore is doing it in a really smart way with JSS, that they're not committing whole hog to it, but now it's an option. Right? And I think a lot of the world is going after headless stuff because they're realizing the complexity of modern content management, and they're trying to find a simple solution that probably doesn't really exist, but
there was a really great
attractive
session with an industry analyst
Yes.
that I saw about headless.
Yep.
Asked me about that afterwards, actually. He had some really cool insights about the startups sort of in
Yep.
the headless CMS space versus the incumbent players like your AEMs and Sitecores. So it was really interesting to hear his take on where that's all going, and that was one of the better sessions.
it was a mind-blowing session. At the end of that, I was like, I want to be this guy's friend. Like, I just want to hang out with him.
Yeah.
So one of the other things that was talked about a little bit was that GDPR has changed all sorts of things when it comes to web marketing, and that luckily Sitecore has the tools to help you deal with that. Also, that Sitecore is working to help support developers through open source tools like SIF, the Sitecore Installation Framework, that I have a love-hate relationship with this week, but it's the tool that you use to install Sitecore through PowerShell, and it makes life a lot easier in what could be a really complex environment. So, and that Sitecore is even though they have their history in .NET development, that has over the past couple of years really embraced open sourcing of things. That Sitecore is now part of that, and that unlike a lot of other content management system platforms where they want to keep everything nice and walled off, and you have to talk to your sales rep to get a copy of the software, that Sitecore makes their packages of the executables and stuff that you need for project references available through NuGet, which I think is really, really awesome, and is a huge step forward. Plus, everything else is in the cloud. That if you're not in the cloud, well, we'll get to that later.
Yeah.
So Style Labs. During the keynote, Sitecore announced that they are acquiring Style Labs. It's a cloud-based digital asset management company. The whole goal behind that is to provide their customers with a more robust end-to-end content management experience that allows them to basically do content management on steroids. That even though Sitecore's existing content management capabilities are phenomenal for a web content management system, there's a whole other world in more complicated workflows for generating digital content, and Style Labs help manage that. And I don't want to talk over your.
Yeah, so let me talk about this a little bit more. Like, why Style Labs? A couple reasons for it. One is that it addresses some of these gaps that we know of in Sitecore's platform, particularly with digital asset management, but also product information management on the side. I think we all know media library is really not state-of-the-art anymore, and it hasn't been for quite a while. So this helps plug that hole as well. They're a small but innovative company. They're based in Belgium. They're about 100 people. They bring a lot of expertise, as Ed was talking about, in this digital asset management space. So if you think about Sitecore, they really take over from the publishing side of it. Their workflow is geared toward the publishing process. It doesn't really extend to content creation, like drafting an article or reviewing an image or a piece of digital media. So that's what Style Labs does. So their expertise in the actual content creation process and the review and the approval and the comments and the feedback that you get is a really big deal, and it really extends how early in the process that Sitecore can be involved in content creation. They also have products in the marketing resource management space, so the budgets around developing these digital content, as well as things like rights management. So we know a lot about things like making sure that your images are copyrighted and how many times you've shown them and what royalties may be due to your suppliers. The other interesting thing about Style Labs, from a technology perspective, is that all of their offerings are software as a service. They're all cloud hosted. So Style Labs has been around for, I think I mentioned, a little under 10 years. They're definitely a generation newer than Sitecore. They're more cloud native. So in addition to acquiring all this domain expertise and sort of marketing technologies and communications technologies, they also bring a lot of technical expertise from how you build an application in the cloud to how you license and sell an application in the cloud. So it'll be really interesting to see what the core Sitecore development team learns from the group at Style Labs and vice versa. And I think the point that I wanted to put in here is that Style Labs also has product information management, a PIM offering, which is not something that Sitecore had. We've always had to integrate with a product information management tool if we were going to display products for sale. And it'll be interesting to see how much of that eventually gets incorporated into Sitecore's commerce offering.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Right, I want to check. I want to make sure that the thing's actually recording because I have a terrible suspicion.
There's a red flashing light, so.
Okay, let me make sure. That's
We're not doing it all over again, Ed.
okay. Yeah, no, we're good. All right, I'm gonna edit all this out. We're fine.
We got that on tape too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's fine. We'll put it in the commentary track. Yeah, the DVD extras.
Fix that in post-production.
Yeah, exactly. Fix it in post.
Up to lunch.
Oh, right. So Sitecore Commerce. At our last meeting, we saw that it was the real deal. We did a great demo of it, and I thought it was really, really eye-opening, having a chance to actually walk through it for real and see how it really worked. But a lot of discussion at Symposium was around commerce. And I understand why. I think Sitecore's understandably excited about the way that this is maturing as a product and the way that it's, the way that it's driving growth, both of licensing and all of those things that Sitecore cares about. But also because I think it's going to make everyone's lives a lot easier, that now you don't have to integrate Sitecore with, whatever commerce platform, that you now have an integrated solution that kind of is just run another PowerShell script and it's ready to go. Or at least that's the promise. So one of the topics that was discussed was using machine learning. And machine learning is a big topic of discussion, or was a big topic of discussion at Symposium. And in fact, one of the examples they brought up in the keynote, and they used as a case study, was the Bisco manufacturer Cannondale. And Cannondale used machine learning and cloud data processing and all of those super exciting marketing technology things to allow you to upload information from your ride tracker and then use that information from your ride tracker to find what type of mountain bike or road bike or whatever bike that Cannondale makes that's appropriate for you and that is most suited for you. And it was really cool because they did it kind of in a real-time demo during the during the keynote, but it really showed the power of these more advanced algorithm development and machine learning capabilities to help connect customers with products in a world where there's a lot of what's the difference between this thing or that thing, right, in a crowded marketplace. And like I mentioned, there are still adoption struggles. Many Sitecore customers still struggle with using all the product, and that people are excited to do more though. And this slide is also my moment where I got to where I wanted to toot my own horn for my standing room only personalization session that I presented at the user group a couple of months ago. I guess at this point, was it last year?
Yeah, I
think it was last year.
Yeah.
year, the year before.
But you know, that people are really interested in that, and I think that we as partners can really help, you know, help Sitecore customers get to the next level by you know, engaging in those challenges and realizing that not everyone is doing machine learning using IoT devices to help connect people with products. That sometimes it's the basics of how do I show a different banner on the homepage to people who like dogs as opposed to people that like cats, and that they're, you know, they're people of all, or they're customers and clients of that entire range, and that we shouldn't you know, we shouldn't forget that there are still lots of people who are still getting started.
And I think that one of the big struggles, and this was sort of a background theme of Symposium, was the conundrum that a lot of businesses are in, where they, like, how do you know what the right way to personalize is? Like, you can test it afterwards, that's great, but you've already invested in coming up with the marketing assets and the copy for all the web pages, and then you test it, and then you find out that that was a complete waste of time and money. So a lot of companies either never get started on the personalization track because they don't know what their ROI is going to be until after they put it in the marketplace, or they, you know, or they go ahead and they invest in it and then find out that the payoff's not there. And so there's been this chicken and the egg problem. Like, how do you know that this way of personalizing is going to work before you go and produce all these final assets that cost you so much money, or you go shoot the video, or you go buy the really expensive, like, full page, you know, imagery for it. And that is, I think, still a nut that everyone's trying to crack. Because if you could do that, like, all the metrics show you that this kind of personalization, this kind of tailoring of your message to particularly your audiences, it pays off if you do it right. But everybody wants to know, how do I know I'm doing it right? So,
Yeah, one of the projects that we did recently, or last year I guess or so, was one of the main successes that I've seen that we had on this, and it's because even before we got involved, they had already gone and done a lot of persona research. We were able to, so they already knew their existing site, they already knew what the traffic was, they already knew the things they were trying to solve. We took it to the next level with workshops with them, and so that site, when it launched, had all the personalization, and they were able to have campaigns and all that right off the bat, and instantly were able to track all the metrics and the success. But that's not normally the case.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was go in for that.
So back to our friends, headless sites, and this is one of my favorite ones. That somehow got the JSS logo to fit perfectly in the headless horseman over there. But you know, as we were talking about earlier, there was an excellent session early on about the trend towards headless right now, and that lots of people are looking to headless because they think it's going to simplify their content management experience. When in reality, in my experience, what it's been is that they're simplifying their content management experience by just not managing their content in any real intelligent way, right? That, like, it's okay, we've got this whole bucket of stuff, we're going to put it on the site and launch it, and then great, now we have a content management system, and we can go change that press release if we ever have to. But it works well for things that don't change that often. But if you have to, you know, if you have a living, breathing website, the value of it over a more traditional approach really starts to degrade. Now, that being said, I feel like that's somewhat because I'm a grumpy old man when it comes to internet technologies. But if you do have a use case that can really take advantage of a headless solution, Sitecore now has an excellent offering for that, and that's in JSS. And JSS essentially is a toolkit that lets you integrate modern front-end technologies, React, Angular, and Vue against the Sitecore, or against Sitecore data, and to integrate that in all the ways that make sense, so that you can actually use that stuff or use those tools as a presentation layer and still have in-context editing, which is a huge, huge thing that most headless systems lack. And and it's now just part of the project or part of the platform. There are some tricky licensing implications, though. I believe that it's only included with the modern consumption-based licensing. If you need it for on-premises-based licensing, you have to talk with your Sitecore sales rep to get that license. Yeah. Oh, and it's available now. You can go download it and start playing with it if you're a developer. Or if you're not a developer, you can still download it and poke the zip file or something.
Hey Ed.
Yeah.
I have a quick question for you about headless. And sure, full disclosure, I sell for Sitecore, but I have a question that you might be able to help shed some light, or anybody on here might be able to. But I'm having trouble working with my customers because a lot of them bring up headless, but I'm having trouble accepting it as anything more than just a buzzword.
Yeah.
Because 9 times out of 10, actually, sorry, 10 times out of 10, somebody has told me they're really interested in headless, but they have 3 people working in their IT department. And a headless deployment is inherently complex and difficult to manage. It inherently means you're going to have a bunch of plates spinning there at the same time in IT all the time, different upgrade paths all the time, stuff breaking and needing to be reconnected. And I haven't, nobody has really, I've been able to sort of squash the idea of headless for them, but just by counseling them and saying, do you really have the horsepower to keep this up and running?
Yeah.
But have you seen any customers or anybody that's really into headless and is willing to commit to it? Or
Yeah.
We are.
Okay.
So one of the projects that I'm on, we're doing headless. And the reason that we're doing it for them, and the reason it makes sense for them, is because when we looked at their roadmap, they are going to want to build native apps that consume the same data, reuse the React and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And to be honest with you, it is making the development process longer. It's a different skill set. You need a lot more front-end guys that know React. It's not the easiest thing to come up with. It does complicate the development process. If it was being done in a traditional Sitecore way, it would go a lot faster. It only makes sense because we know what the roadmap looks like. We would be doing them a disservice if we had not, kind of brought the subject up, walked through it with them, and they made the decision with us. But in the end, it's still the right decision for them because next year and down there, they're going to want to take all the stuff that we put together and have native apps consume it. That makes sense. But it is definitely your build process is more complicated. It's much more front end. It's much more that kind of stuff. And the skill set's way different.
I see 2 big drivers. There was a really old but influential article from about 2011 from Martin Fowler, who was one of the leading lights of he's one of the original Gang of 4 enterprise patterns of software development. And he had an old article called The 2-Stack CMS. And what it was pointing out was just that the application you use to edit with is not necessarily the same technology stack that you would need to serve your website.
right.
And so you could optimize editing and you could optimize the delivery of the site if you actually thought of them as 2 different applications. Now, Sitecore doesn't work that way. Its traditional base has been a unified platform that does everything. But I think as people are moving to the cloud, they're realizing that, in fact, you could statically render the whole site, and man, you could scale like crazy if you did that. So they're thinking about, well, if I made content delivery either headless or very JavaScript-centric, or I don't necessarily have to use the same platform to serve it as I do to edit it. But that leads to a lot of other issues. So from an IT perspective, I understand the push to headless, but then you have to ask yourself the question, well, who's maintaining the site? If this is a bunch of content authors, and you've just taken away their ability to preview,
Right.
I think this is a non-starter,
Right.
right?
It's funny that you mentioned that the ability to generate static websites. It just cracks me up the way that things have come full circle in 15 years now. Because some of the original web content management systems that I started working with when I started my career were things like Red Dot and Crown Peak. And those tools, that's exactly what they did. That you had a classic ASP backend that kept all the data in a database, and then when you went to go publish the website, it literally published the website by taking that data, melding it with templates that you developed, and then delivering flat HTML files or flat XML files to over to whatever target you wanted. And we used to publish things via FTP, and you could do some really crazy things. One of the ones that I had done was, and this was incredibly confusing to develop, but it was a classic ASP templating that then published PHP files because the client wanted to run the whole thing in Linux hosting. And so as a result, it all had to get, but they still needed a little tiny bit of server-side things happening, right? Like they needed to be able to submit forms. And so as a result, what we ended up doing was you had this big VB file that when you hit publish, it shot out to PHP files. And that was 12 years ago. And now seeing that come around, it's trying to solve the same problem but with different technologies. I mean, personally, I think a lot of the things that are driving it are because technology and web technologies have a kind of history of things that start out small for great uses, then become bigger and bigger and bigger and go enterprisey, and then they become big behemoths, and then there's another wave of things that start out small and simple and then become bigger and bigger and bigger and until they become an enterprise solution, and then there's another wave behind that. And that people are always trying to adopt technologies that are on that path because they're like, oh my god, Vignette is such a nightmare as a CMS problem. I don't know how many of you ever worked with Vignette, but Vignette was a big, huge, monolithic CMS platform. And people were like, oh my goodness, Vignette is such a pain, it's so difficult to use, it's so difficult to develop against, it's so expensive to own, so now let's go buy this Red Dot thing, that looks exciting. And then they would buy Red Dot, and then that was great because it was small and scrappy and it's a little 100-person company.
But it doesn't do this and it doesn't do that. If we just had a system that was bigger.
Yep, exactly.
It's this pendulum that swings back and forth. And so
Yeah.
I think the pendulum has definitely swung toward these sort of cheap and cheerful systems.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm just trying to get my mobile app up, right? I only have I'm running a single-page web app.
Yeah.
Right, so I don't need this enterprise-grade system.
Let me just
behind
set
it.
up a WordPress site for that.
Right, exactly.
And
so I think some of what we're seeing is just this reaction to the big systems.
Yeah.
But there's some really interesting ideas in there. Again, the whole idea of separating delivery from management, that makes sense. And in some senses, Sitecore's always had that split.
Right.
But what's weird about it is that, what's the first thing you do when you're going to scale Sitecore? Well, set up a CD server by installing this executable and then turning off half your configs. Why are we doing that?
Mhm.
That's a ridiculous thing to do.
Right. Yeah.
So I think people are looking at that and going, well, maybe the delivery side does need to look and feel different than the management side.
Yeah, I think a good extension of that is that Sitecore is actually heading in that direction.
Hmm?
That was something we're going to talk about in a couple minutes.
I think actually we should.
Okay, let's get.
Yeah. Sorry to derail things.
No, that's fine.
It's another train metaphor, by the way.
This was my very quick thing about Sitecore helping to support developers with open sourcing their tools, and then everything being in the cloud. And this gets to that, right? That this year everything was cloud focused. You're a dinosaur if you're not doing. It seems like you're supposed to be a dinosaur if you're not doing anything in the cloud, because it's now a mature model and probably the future of the Sitecore world. That being said, there's still lots of people who aren't. But to help those people, we have
this. So I went to this Sitecore host track, and this is super exciting because I'm the architect and I like architecture, and this is a cool thing. So Sitecore right now is really retooling the way their platform works, and partly it's a response to JSS and headless, and partly it's just the right thing to do, given how people develop and manage their websites. So what is it? It's a new architectural foundation for Sitecore applications. It's providing Sitecore with the opportunity to rethink the way they do stuff. And it moves the platform to a more modern base. So it's using .NET Core. Why is this important? Well, .NET Core means that suddenly Sitecore is portable. Up until this point, the prerequisite for Sitecore was has to be on Windows, has to be on IIS. If you've got a .NET Core app, that's not the case. You can deploy .NET Core on Linux. You could not use IIS, you could use Apache if you wanted to. That opens up a huge amount of hosting options, right? You want to host in AWS? Super easy, you can spin up Linux servers to do it, right? So this is actually really interesting from an IT perspective, that they're moving this way. It also addresses, I think, a lot of issues that people are very familiar with Sitecore sort of all-in-one. The all-in-one was a great approach, and still is for some things, right? You want to spin up a demo site? The all-in-one is great. I run an executable, done, I got a demo. If you're a developer, really easy to set up a developer platform. Do a quick install, I got everything I need in an all-in-one. But as soon as you start thinking about real customer deployments, yeah, my CM needs to look different than an all-in-one machine. My CD is completely different. Processing, I have to like turn everything off and like flip a whole bunch of weird switches. So it makes deploying very awkward. Also, because it's an all-in-one baked-in system, we all know that startup times are terrible. Why? Because it's got to load everything and then figure out what it doesn't need. So tight coupling, slow startup, upgrades have always been a beast. In fact, most people don't upgrade; they migrate, between versions of Sitecore. And from Sitecore's perspective, like if you talk to their development teams, they're like, man, just testing that all these different components that are all plugged into this one huge platform, but they all work together and don't cause any issues for this other module over here, is a nightmare. So what they've been thinking about is, well, if we're going to move to .NET Core anyway, what does this give us the opportunity to do? So let's go to the next slide. So if they move to .NET Core, one thing that's interesting about this Sitecore host is that they've realized that there's a lot of operations in Sitecore that don't actually need to be part of the web app. Publishing was a great example, right? They've already started doing this for some aspects of what they're doing. So we could move publishing to just a separate little thing, a little console app. It does nothing but move data between master and web. It doesn't need to even be a website. It could just be like a little cron job that you run on your server. It also, by moving to this sort of host platform, they strip it down to really just the basics that you need, which means that starting up a Sitecore host is really quick. It's just setting up a few basics, and I'll show you what that is in the next slide. And Sitecore is already starting to use this. So let's flip to the next slide. So let's talk about what's in here. So the Sitecore host, again, is a little tiny console app. It sets up commands for you. It provides access to the file system. It has components in it that allow you to run it as a service. It handles diagnostics and tracing. It handles configuration. It handles loading plugins. Notice something it doesn't do. There's no mention of web here yet. So even loading up your web stack is a plugin to Sitecore host. So this is really minimal, and it's really minimal because they're intending it to be the base for everything. So if you flip to the next slide, you can see this already. The publishing service is an early version of Sitecore host. Again, there's no web service on top of that. It's just a console app. Sitecore Commerce is using an early version of host, and if you've looked at Sitecore Commerce 9 or 9.1, you know that it's built out of this huge, there's a base, which has almost nothing in it, and then there's this huge, giant pyramid of plugins that you stack on top of that to do different services. What they're going to use Sitecore host for is any new future development. So with 9.1, we've got the Sitecore Identity Foundation, replacing the old member management structure, yay! There's going to be Horizon, which is a new interface for editing Sitecore. I'll show you some screenshots of that. And this universal tracker, so a way of tracking events and page views across everything. Sort of like the second coming of the Federated Experience Manager. Much better, much simpler. But yeah, everything going forward is going to be on this Sitecore host base. And it's really going to work, I think, much better for cloud scenarios. Let's go to the next slide, because let's talk about Horizon. I borrowed this screenshot from one of the keynotes, because again, this is like the new editing interface. The hope is that eventually this is going to replace Content Editor and Experience Editor. I will be so happy when I don't have to explain to Sitecore users anymore which application they use to edit what. It'll all be in one place. They're showing you some nice little dashboardy things because the other piece, in addition to unifying Content Manager and Experience Manager, is they're going to bring in a lot of the analytics and insights. So one of the big struggles, as we mentioned earlier, is that people don't see what they need to do to get real impact on their site. And I highly recommend going onto YouTube and looking for a bunch of people who recorded the video of Horizon. Go watch that because it does some really interesting things. You go to edit a page, and in the top of the banner, it tells you 57% of the people who view this page are doing it on desktop, and another 30% are doing it on mobile. Like those stats are right there in this interface. So now it spurs actions like, well, wait a minute, what does the mobile view for this thing look like? 30% of my traffic is mobile. They've tried to sprinkle those little insights all throughout this interface so that as you are working with things, it's making suggestions for these personalization settings or telling you, this page doesn't get visited anyway, so why are you spending your time on it? Like, you should really be focused somewhere else. Let's go to the next slide. Sadly, this is the best thing I could find for the actual editing interface. The video is much better. Go watch the video if you can find it. This is a phone shot of a video that was presenting on the symposium stage. So I'm going to stand up to point this thing out. So again, apologize for the blurs. But you can see here that the main editing interface really is that combination of content editor, experience editor. So we've got the content tree from the content editor. The main experience editor panel is here. Over here on this side, you've got your sort of publishing, versioning stuff. And then down here is like the field editor from Content Manager. So these are the field sections. You could expand these and actually edit the fields in there. So it's all together in one spot. Up here, it's really hard to see with these icons, but if you want to look at your different devices, this is mobile, this is whatever, you just click that, and it does it. Here's the other thing that's interesting. This is all built on that new Sitecore host, and it's all built headless style. Weirdly, they're using headless in here. This is all JavaScript talking with a new web services layer. So the startup times for this, they relayed some stats, are like where it would take something like 28 seconds for content editor to load. This thing loads in like 3.
Yeah,
Like
it's amazing.
It's a huge improvement. And again, because you're not switching between content editor and experience editor, it's like there's no reason why you would have to pay the penalty to load experience or preview mode and content mode. Cool thing about this is that an early preview of this is available in 9.1. You can install it side by side with your content editor and experience editor. So Sitecore was very smart about that. So you can actually get it, use it for what it can do now, and there's still some features coming and pending. Provide them with feedback for what features it doesn't do that you want it to do. But you could install this with 9.1 side by side with existing client applications. So you could always fall back.
And a fun thing about 9.1 is that they didn't include it in here because it didn't happen during Symposium.
Actually, next slide. Cool. This is probably what you can talk to. Oh, no. Oh, all right. So one more slide, and then we can talk to what you're about to talk to. So I mentioned that this Horizon thing is all in the new stack. So this is it. .NET Core. It's using a new query language for web services called GraphQL. So no more returning the entire freaking item. You can say, I just need these 3 fields, which is, again, what gets them some of the speed. It's being rendered in Node.js, all in JavaScript. Angular is what its base is. I don't even know what some of these icons are. This guy, Quill, you've probably never heard of it. Open source replacement for the rich text editor. Go look at its demos. It's super cool, and it's super fast. So this is all HTML5 rich text editor editing. So I think it's really cool. I'm going to skip over this just in the interest of time, but the architecture is actually really interesting. Those are more details. This is what you were talking about.
Yeah, what I was going to say was the super exciting thing is that last week, Sitecore 9.1 was made available to the general public. And so if you want to see that awesome screen or that awesome interface, and play with it yourself. You can just go download it. Spend a couple of days setting up your PowerShell scripts to install it. But it starts in 3 seconds. I just can't help myself.
Is that interface available or is it still by request? Because I thought they said they're not gonna release it with 9.1. You have to request them to send a package.
It's in a preview. I don't know if you have to request it, but it is definitely an additional thing you install.
Oh, okay.
The reason I'm talking about?
All right.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I thought that they were going ahead and offering it, it's just that you have to, I don't think you have to ask for like a specific license, you just have to add it.
Yeah.
That's what you have to do.
It's the download? It's,
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, okay. We'll try it.
cool.
Yep. So, as we mentioned, there were a lot of things going on in Symposium. Too many tracks for any person to be at the same time. Too many, just too much. So if you want to catch up on any of it, there were great recaps. These are some examples of
The first one at the top is John Francois Leroux. He's from Coveo. He and his Coveo cronies literally divvied up all the tracks and they posted everything that they recorded on that massive blog post. So they did Coveo longstanding Sitecore partner. They did a really good job of making sure that they covered about everything. So that's a fantastic collection of resources. They still didn't cover everything, but of the ones that I saw, that was the most comprehensive collection of Symposium stuff. And then I think some of these other ones about what's new in 9.1 were particularly good articles to give you the wrap up of the major announcements and that sort of thing.
So one of the things I learned at Symposium, or at this Symposium, was to bring good sneakers and an umbrella because the 2 hotels were connected by this breezeway, which is great on a nice, beautiful day. But on one of those always exciting mid-afternoon Florida storms, it was helpful to have a couple of choices of session that happened to be at the hotel that you were currently at, so that you did not have to get yourself licensed. So going back and forth. And lastly, where's Symposium 2019 going to be? Nobody knows. They haven't announced a location and date yet, so we're still waiting on that. I don't know. Part of me hopes that it's nearby. Part of me hopes that it's not.
Hawaii.
Yeah, Hawaii. Oh God.
If I'm a betting man, I'm saying it's in the ARIA again, because my understanding is
Does it
that
have to be in warm weather?
when we went back to Vegas, it wasn't in the ARIA because they were rebuilding the ARIA at that point.
Mhm.
Oh.
They didn't even cut, it was going through a big renovation, so I'm guessing that's.
I hope so. I like the aria. I thought that was
Well, now it's
exciting.
even bigger and better, they expanded it to be even more for.
It was. I felt like it was the least Vegas-y, or it was the least New Jersey of all the casinos in Vegas. So one other thing I wanted to talk about, since we were talking a lot about headless, and there was a thing that I didn't get a chance to bring up earlier, that one of the things I think is driving it is also the fact that as difficult as it may be to find people with some of the front-end frameworks out in the marketplace to do that stuff, that I think it's still frequently a lot easier to find those people than it is to find experienced Sitecore people. And I know from the perspective of someone who has run a Sitecore practice that trying to find people to do this stuff is difficult. And that if you have people who know how to do it, you're better off having them do the stuff that's really Sitecore focused as opposed to just knocking out, view after view after view of presentation stuff. And so if you can offload those tasks to people who have a different skill set that's more widely available out in the world, that there's an attraction for that. I don't know to what extent that's actually really going to be realized, but that is one thing I can see.
That's another thing. They want to jump into this new, because all the cool kids that come out of the college now, they all do React and Angular. They don't do .NET anymore. So they want to attract them, towards Sitecore.
Yeah, again, the whole idea, like JavaScript is the new C. Everybody has to learn JavaScript because it's the only language browsers understand, and everything's on the web. So I think it does make sense that they're shifting a little bit more of their focus on the JavaScript side because there is a larger pool of developer talent there.
Yeah.
But as Ed and I have mentioned, I really wish I could find that presentation, like the whole analyst's view.
Oh, it was so good.
Of the headless thing.
So good.
I mean, his basic take on it was you could go with one of the sort of new school CMSs that are sort of headless native, but they don't do preview, they don't do all these advanced features. You're going to run into limitations really early. Your better bet would be to go with an established player like Sitecore that just needs to, slim down a little bit, drop a few pounds, and they'll be in fighting shape again. And I think actually that what we're seeing with these initiatives like Sitecore Host, like Horizon, and like some of the new services, web services stuff that Sitecore is doing, is that they're already thinking about how to do that, how to be a little more cloud friendly from a deployment and IT perspective.
Yeah. So that's it.